brings me great pleasure to officially inaugurate the National Council on Privatization.
The mandate is one of commercialization, privatization, optimizing government investment.
What we have realized with power is that, with the right tariff, you can give everybody power. We are giving most people in Lagos, we are giving them close to 18-20 hours of power today.
Ikoyi is one of our major load centers out of the 52 that we have in the police presently.
Welcome to OTNA, your window to information on optimization.
At every stage of life, success comes stage by stage. And so success is actually never final, but it's also true that failure is always fatal. That is why you need courage and consistency to stay at your work, ensuring you get success at the end of the day. It is true that our country, Nigeria, has indeed come a long way in trying to solve the problems and challenges surrounding the power sector. But there's still a lot that needs to be done. And there's no doubt that it requires courage and consistency. This is OTNA, optimizing the nation's assets. On OTNA, we look at the process of privatization and commercialization. And it's all aimed towards optimizing our assets to bring gains and joy to the Nigerian people. Thank you for joining us on yet another edition of the program today. We'll be taking a look at the power sector, how much courage and consistency is needed to get us to where we should be. What are the problems surrounding the reforms of the power sector? When and how soon will we begin to see the gains that we've seen around the telecom sector and the pension in this sector called the power sector? This and more we bring today as we unveil our guest. He is the Director of the Energy Department of the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE. They deal with the process of reforming the Nigerian power sector. Welcome our guest today, Mr. Amechi Christian Aloke. It's no doubt that the Nigerian power sector is critical to the overall development of the economy. Mr. Amechi Aloke begins by giving us an overview of what he does as the Director of Energy and the background story of the power sector reform before now.
Essentially, my role is to try to monitor what is happening to the reform that's already taken place in the power sector and try to see where we have gaps, and so we can rectify those things and ensure that the vision established at the time the power sector reform was done is eventually and ultimately achieved. Okay, so at the time the reform was conceived in 1999-2000, at the advent of the civilian administration, the Nigerian power sector was in total, what would I call it? It was in total distress. So the reform was aimed at creating entirely a new power sector where you ultimately have 2-4 efficient power supply to all Nigerians, no matter where they live. So it is the vision to bring in private sector investment into the power sector, because it became obvious that government alone could not do all the infrastructure required to ensure that we have a modern economy which can only be anchored through efficient supply of electricity.
What significant steps were taken by the National Council on Privatization, and have these steps been justified?
Okay, the first significant step taken by the National Council on Privatization, which is the body that oversees activities of the Bureau of the Public Enterprises and is chaired by the Vice President. The first step they took was to consider what we call steering committee. So there were sectorial steering committees that looked in depth into each of the sectors of the economy. So for the power sector, a steering committee was set up. So this steering committee was the one that designed the policy and new framework for the power sector. If we hadn't reformed the electricity sector, I'm sure by now there have been total chaos in the electricity sector. Before now, most Nigerians, all they say is that, oh, NEPA, we had no idea what it takes for the light to be there for most Nigerians. But today, people are beginning to realize that there are what we call distribution companies that is completely different from those who generate electricity, from those who transmit the electricity, and from those who generate gas. So what has happened is that the problem has actually been dimensioned. And without dimensioning and understanding a problem, you can't find a solution. Just sitting and shouting NEPA, we would never have solved our electricity problem. But today, solutions are being crafted around the problem that have been identified. Distribution, people now understand what is going on. So you now have 11 distribution companies. Back then, there wasn't anything like that. It was the reform that created the distribution companies. So we have 11 of them. We have the transmission company that serves everybody. Then we now have the generators, which are independent companies running their business. So now the problems are now being resolved, and I believe that if we stay focused, ultimately this problem will resolve. And if you look at areas like Iko and Ikeja, they are beginning to move away from the kind of challenges other people have. Their loss level, what you call the aggregate, technical, and commercial loss level, are going down, which means they are becoming viable businesses, and it will eventually get to all the other discourse.
As we know, we've had investors coming to the power sector. What due diligence was done to ensure the optimization of the power sector?
The process that led to emergence of the investors we have today was well structured. We had, the BPE had advisors that work with them to lay out a well organized process. First of all, it starts with advertising globally that this is what we are doing. We intend to privatize this company, because by then we have created 11 distribution companies, 6 generation companies, and the transmission company. So the distribution companies were up for privatization. The generation companies were up for privatization. So there was a global advert, and companies came from all over the world to have a look at what we are doing and follow the process. So that process, initially there was over 400 companies around the globe that came, but the benchmark for qualifying is extremely high. If you do not have up to $100 million worth of assets, you'll be disqualified. So, and $100 million is not a small amount of money, you can just get. So that eliminated a lot of the companies, that came in and thought that it was just an easy thing to get into. No, that threshold was high enough to ensure that only those who are serious remain in the business. So eventually, there was a lot of scrutiny on the companies that at the end of the day, out of all these 400 companies that indicated interest, we are only left with about 20. So to tell you how rigorous that process was, to ensure that only the very best that ultimately got this company. So the first step we did was to create Power Holding Company of Nigeria, which is a limited liability company. So once that was done, we now went on to break PPACN both horizontally and vertically. In other words, you now had generation, transmission, and distribution. And then when you now go to each one, for distribution, we now broke into 11 different companies. For transmission, we have one company. For distribution, for generation, we had 6 companies at that initial. So those are steps we are taking. Then now, having created this, we now created support mechanism, because government, when they exit from operation, because the whole essence was of government to exit from operations of these entities, because obviously it dawned on everybody that government can't operate businesses that way. But government doesn't exist completely. Government now creates an enable environment to enable private sector to come in. So in creating that enable environment, that's led to the creation of the regulator, which is the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, which helps to ensure that even when government exists on operation, that there is a fair market, there's a fair industry, that you have to play by the rules. Being private sector driven sector, private sector has to play by the rules made by the regulator, who is a neutral party. He serves everybody. So we created those support mechanisms. The MBET was created. NEMCO was created, Nigeria Electricity Liability Management Company. That one was created to help manage liability that was already accumulated in the power sector as at then. So after these enabling environments were all created, the next step was now to go to now privatize and bring in private sector to manage, to own and manage these entities that were created. So that's what I said, that we advertise globally. The process that eventually succeeded in bringing in the private sector to participate in the distribution and generation sector started in 2010 under the administration of President Goodluck Jonathan. So adverts were made, and as part of the marketing process, the BPE and critical stakeholders like NNPC, TCN, and other people traveled around the world in major cities to explain to what Nigeria is about doing, just to elicit global interest and participation. So that was running, and visits were made to South Africa, New York, Dubai, London, and there was a lot of enthusiasm and interest. And that's why when this transaction was done, none of all the companies that were privatized had foreign tanker partners. Why foreign tanker partners? Because it hadn't been done locally. So you can't be talking about local tanker partner. You have to bring people who have done it elsewhere and succeeded and know what is to be done to partner with local entrepreneurs and investors. So that was exactly what was done. All the companies had major global tanker partners come in, but along the line there was a problem. In 2015, when issue of currency, just like what is happening now, Naira exchange rate started deteriorating fast because these tanker partners are usually paid in US dollars. Once they started having those serious challenges with foreign exchange to pay them and all that, became a problem, and most of them had to exit. But the concept was to ensure that all the players had a liquid start, because the condition for you to qualify included that you must have a tanker partner that will display that he has not only done it, but is currently doing it, and you can go and verify where he is, distributing power, for instance. That's why he had Manila distribution company, the major company distributing electricity in Manila. They were in the process. In fact, globally, all the major companies, Tata in India, they were in the process. So most of those major companies were all in the room.
The Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE, developed the Share Purchase Agreement, SPA. What's the significance of this share purchase agreement in the privatization of the power sector? And let's find out details about the terms of agreement.
Okay, so share purchase agreement articulates the conditions and the performance levels expected of all the people who bought these companies. So it is the binding agreement between the parties that we can hold on to and say, this is what you must perform. That was decided based on the circumstance of each of the segment that was being privatized. And when you get to that segment, you look at the circumstance of each of the entities that are being privatized. For the distribution companies, we sold 60% all. There's no difference between one distribution company and another. Government retained 40% and gave private sector 60%, which is sufficient to give them the control to enable them manage those distribution companies. But when you go to generation side of the transaction, you find out that for the hydros, it was a concession. They were not sold. So we granted a concession because you understand water rights is something that we're going to live with us for a very long time. So you can't sell away such rights. So what we did was to grant concession for Kainji and Shiroro, 30-year concession to the. So after 30 years, those assets will revert back to government to decide on what to do with it. Let's do under concession, whatever that period were. Then when you now go to thermal generation power plants, for the thermal generation power plants, based on the conditions, some of them were completely dilapidated. Generation companies come to the end of their technical life. In other words, they have reached, when you build a thermal power plant, it will burn for so many years. So after that period, you have to completely, if you want to use it again, like in aircraft, they talk about D-check, for the same thing that applies to the power plant. You have to completely rehabilitate the power plant from beginning. So for those ones that were in that state, we sold them 100%, because the challenge is that if you don't sell 100%, if you retain, say, 40%, you'll be asked to bring money immediately and the government was not in a position to start funding those things. So those ones are, but for those ones that were relatively, in good condition, like Geregu and Egbi, government sold certain level of percentage so that some shares were retained, for government to sell in due course or possibly sell it to the general public. So that was how the structure was designed.
As detailed as this process seems, what really matters is the result. So has all this given us the expected result?
Yes, it has, because if you look at the generation segment, all the generation companies are doing well. All. They've all fulfilled their mandates, because our problem today in Nigeria is not that we have a lot of generation, but unfortunately, there's challenges in gas supply, because that's entirely another industry. That's one of the challenges in the power sector. Gas is completely not within the control of, if you're talking about gas, you're talking about NNPC, you're talking about, which is entirely a different part of the energy sector. So there are serious challenges with gas supply. Then there are also serious challenges with transmission, of the electricity generated. So many of the power plants are available, but there are serious transmission constraint. So I think that formula, the way it will encourage the private sector to go out there and get the resources required and completely rehabilitate the power plant. So I think it has worked very well. So for the distribution segment, government still retains some interest, in that segment, but enough shares were given to the private sector to be able to make business decisions and manage those distribution companies.
OTNA, optimizing the nation's assets.
Now, from the legal perspective, the BPE got the irrevocable power of attorney, IPA. What does this mean? What's the significance of the irrevocable power of attorney, IPA, in the privatization process?
Okay, that's the area of the legal construct of a transaction. If you don't have power to sell something, you cannot sell it. You cannot transfer the powers you did not have. So, the irrevocable power of attorney was given by those who possessed the shares before the reform started. Before now, based on the 1959 Finance Act, Murphy is the agency of government that was authorized to warehouse shares on behalf of government, because the ministries are not legal entities, they say. So Murphy was created that when government wants to create a business, Murphy comes in and takes the shares on behalf of the ministry that owns it and the federal government. So for the BPE to carry out these transactions, the first step, first of all these companies were gazetted under the BPE Act. So this agent had to transfer to BPE the irrevocable power of attorney, meaning that they have ceded total control permanently to BPE to enable BPE run this transaction. Because if it's revocable, that means that even when you have sold, someone can revoke it and say, I've not sold, and that will lead to total chaos. So those shares are now transferred to the National Council on Privatization to manage as it deems fit, and no shares are actually the objectives are at the end of the day, no shares will be left for government. The shares you saw that the 40% we're talking about is only temporary to hold it until the place have been cleaned up and you say to Nigerians. It's not meant to be retained permanently. That was the decision because obviously government is not meant to be competing with its citizens when it comes to business. You as citizens, you go and make the money, you pay government its own share of money. So that was the thinking behind structuring this, and that ultimately all these shares will be sold to the general public.
Thank you for joining us on OTNA. We've been speaking with the Director of the Energy Department at the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE, Mr. Amechi C. Aloke, who has already told us of the origin of the power sector policies and the immediate results seen. But do we have challenges in the power sector? I'm sure your answer is as good as mine. And Mr. Aloke agrees that we do have challenges. But let's find out what lessons can be learned from these challenges.
There have been challenges. There was this misconception that, that the moment we transit to private sector, it is a head around the problem solved. Unfortunately, it never worked out that way. Because, to enable us get to privatizing, a lot of countries actually have tried privatizing their power sector and they failed. Because there are so many resistance from left and right said that at the point, but Nigeria was steadfast.
Now, moving forward, the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, is committed to taking the right decisions for the success of the power sector. What needs to be done in this regard?
Well, as I earlier said, today the government is doing a lot because having realized some of the mistakes that were done in the past, some of those funding that is required to bridge the gap and begin to make the business make sense is being handled by the government, and ensure that policies are consistent. Regulation must be consistent. You can't do this today, tomorrow you do this. So if investors don't have clarity, if they don't have clarity of what is happening in the industry, they will stay away.
The question on the lips of most Nigerians is, when will we get it right in the power sector in Nigeria?
Yeah, we are quite optimistic that give 5 years, within the next 5 and 10 years, we will see entirely a different power sector.
The English-American author and inspirational speaker Simon Sinek said, and I quote, "Words may inspire, but only action creates change." The Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE, under the current administration, is determined to consolidate on the previous gains of privatization and commercialization. Here on OTNA, we will be giving you details as they unfold. Thanks for being part of the program today. On behalf of the team, till we come your way again on the next edition next week, it's bye for now.
In airline business, you have to be prudent in whatever you do. BP, Bureau of Enterprise, is the best agents that will monitor, transform, and meanwhile, whatever we call privatization today. In the area of maritime, you look at our ports today, the road is not good.